Hello, hello. It is Zaide here with another episode of DramaQuest. Before we talk about our guest today, just a reminder to check the links that are in the description there. We have a whole link tree, tons of great stuff. So check that out. And in addition to that, I am now streaming with my lovely wife every Monday, Tuesday, and Saturday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on Twitch, twitch.tv/ZadeGod. Please come check it out as we die a lot on our permadeath characters. But with that said, let's talk about our guest. Today we are joined by none other than the very famous Dupree. He has led a ton of guilds on TLP servers, notably the TLP branches of the guild Magus Imperialis Magicus from Rallos Zek. And during his long tenure on Rallos Zek and Povar, he was a member of a number of guilds, but also, of course, a member of MiM. So he's here to talk to us today about a little bit of his time on TLP and Povar, but a big part of his time on Rallos Zek. With that said, Dupree, the floor is yours.
It's great to be here, man. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you.
So, EverQuest. What can I say? It's a game that's changed all of our lives, right?
Oh yeah. How did you discover EQ?
I was working at a video game store. EverQuest came out my senior year of high school, so I was 18, and I was just. It was one of those video game stores, used game store, and we would buy used games, sell them back to people, get new games in, and we would play them all night long in the store. But one of the games that we couldn't play in the store because we didn't have computers there was EverQuest, and the guys were like, "You got to try this. You got a computer at home?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." So I was really big into tribes and playing at Zaide at the time, and that was kind of what I was playing, more the first person shooters.
Right.
But they're like, "You got to try this out," and I was like, "I don't know if that's something I want to do," but they ended up convincing me, and so I went out and I bought it. I actually had to go to GameStop in the mall for it because we didn't carry it, and I loaded it on my computer, called them up, said, "What server are you on?" And they said Rallos Zek, and that was the start of a very interesting and amazing career playing this game so far.
Having a cold start on Rallos Zek, like a hardcore PvP server, is like getting thrown into the deep end.
It kind of is. I think that my time playing at Zaide especially kind of helped with that, just because I was used to getting my ass kicked.
Right.
But it was also very interesting because I didn't know any different in those types of games. There was no just PvE environment for me. I assumed that all the servers were PvP kind of. It was.
Oh yeah.
I never really paid attention to the server labels. I just logged into the server where my buddies were at, which is funny because after about 6 months, they abandoned the server entirely and left me there.
But they got the hooks in on you.
They did. The server was just one of those things. It was really interesting. We'll talk about this a bunch during my storytelling, but Rallos really was the epitome of a fuck around and find out server.
Oh yeah.
Reputation there mattered so much, and it's funny because I was listening to your episode with Lyran about Vulak, and she was talking about how she had come back to EverQuest, and everybody was always, reputation meant something. If another guild was the first one to engage a raid mob, you didn't try to steal it, and that definitely didn't happen on Vulak. That's the type of stuff that would start a war on Rallos. And its wars there were not short-lived. They weren't a couple days. They would last months.
So your whole guild would become KOS if you guys did something real shitty?
Yes. If not the individual, the entire guild certainly could be. Usually what would happen is if you pissed off the wrong person, your guild officers would be notified that they either kick you out or they can expect to be trampled on for a long time.
That sounds awesome. I mean, it sounds so compelling to be real with you, versus like having to just do hours and hours of meetings and politics on like a blue server.
Yeah, I remember that with our time on Lockjaw. I mean, how many hours did we spend negotiating rotations and whatnot?
Just never ended. I blame Dima, but you know what I mean? It was never ending over there.
I'm right there with you.
Darth didn't help things.
Darth, I had totally forgotten about Darth until I listened to your episodes, and man, that guy was a character.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's just like,
Hey,
sometimes you take who's willing.
we all make poor choices in our decisions in these guilds, but
Yeah.
I won't hold it against you.
Thanks. So hey, tell me about like what was your first character? What'd you make?
My first character was a paladin named
Hell
Pray.
yeah. Hell
I
yeah.
To me, it was just the idea of a holy warrior was the greatest thing, and so I started EverQuest about a month after it actually launched, so I
Okay.
wasn't there for day one. Um,
But
that
almost
character,
nobody was, right? Like back then it was normal like to have 20, 50, 100 people in the newbie zones fresh every day.
yep, it was definitely very much so that. But I was still there early when, for example, on Rallos, you could, the early part of Rallos, when you died, somebody could steal your entire corpse worth of loot.
Wow.
But they eventually amended that to one item and just the coins.
Yeah.
So one tradable item, I should say.
One item, it couldn't be the weapons and it couldn't be in a bag. Was that the way it worked? Was that even later?
Eventually, the weapons were taken out as well, and it couldn't be in a bag.
Yeah.
But
I
to
remember
start,
playing on RZ and just being like, I would get low health and I'd be like rushing to bag all my shit.
yes, you got very good at bagging everything. In fact, the people who would use MacroQuest on EverQuest or on Rallos would actually utilize that feature where they just hit a button and it would bag everything immediately for them. It was crazy.
Oh, that's whack.
Yeah, it was, but you couldn't do anything about your coin. If you got killed, you lost your coin.
Can you delete coin? I wonder because like just out of spite, like delete all your plat before you get killed.
You could back then. There were a lot of things that people did that were really shitty back in the day. Like I remember being at the bank once and somebody handed me like 32,000 platinum or copper.
Oh, you couldn't move.
I couldn't move. Yep. And I was a newbie, so I didn't know what to do. But they handed me all this cash, and I was like, "This is great." Next thing I knew, I was getting pummeled, and I was dead. And
Right.
they got all their money back plus all of mine and one
It
of
was
my
a setup.
items. Rel has had a lot of shenanigans like that. I may have participated in a few of them. I remember sitting on the Kelethin bank, casting fear on people, and they would run over the side and die.
Nice.
There were lots of fun things like that, charming players and running them over and setting them down next to a hill giant and then breaking charm. That one I didn't do, but I never played an enchanter, so I had that done to me a number of times though.
And then you have to eat the EXP death, right? Because PvP
You
deaths
do.
didn't cause you to lose EXP, did they?
No, they did not. But that was something that a lot of the lesser liked players would do because they would just find creative ways to kill you.
Yeah. Well, that's it's part of the flavor of the experience. Looking
It
back.
it really was. Honestly, if I could recreate Rallos the way that it was, I would go back and play there in an instant.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even be a question. It was such a unique server. The community was so very different from everybody else.
The number one thing I remember from playing on Rallos, because I played there casually as a like a hey, let's go check out this PvP thing.
Yeah.
I remember Funky Tunic, Gnomes, and Crushbone. And then like there being like shouts like, oh no, it's that Funky Tunic gnome, he's back. And you'd have to like evacuate because no one in those low levels could kill someone with the fungi.
Yeah. And it's funny because, Rallos was by and large behind the progression of the rest of the servers. We got the expansions at the same time, but we were so busy killing each other that none of us had really that gear. So when something like that came up and somebody figured out how to make themselves like a newbie in a fungi tunic, they would reign supreme for weeks because nobody would figure it out.
And then would people do the thing where they would level up and then de-level so their skill caps were higher than the level range?
Yep, that definitely happened. Because Rallos, you had to be within 4 levels, if you remember.
Yeah.
So they definitely terrorize the newbie yards that way. I remember watching a rogue with his epic before they put the requirement of the level on there, running around Greater Fadar just slaughtering people.
Dude, that's
leveled all the way
crazy.
down. Yeah, that was pretty common, and they did it because it was a great way to make cash. I mean, they'd only get 2 or 3 platinum here, but it's like killing easy mobs. You know, they go in once a day, kill all the newbies, get their 2 or 3 platinum from them, and walk away with a couple hundred platinum by the time they were done each day.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. That sounds awesome, and I remember having a lot of fun. I remember. Don't ban me after all these years, Dark Paw, but Rallos Zek was the first server where I did any RMT. So
Mm-hmm.
I came in and I bought platinum so that I could get items, and I bought what did I get? I got a full set of peerless dragon armor from the Western Waste, like trash dragons.
Yep.
And I was like, all right, I'm going to be killer with this. And it was like Luckland, I think, at that time.
Okay.
So it wasn't like really great. Honestly, that armor was never really great, but for a newbie, it was dope. And I was like crushing people until the real twinks came in. People with like Blade of Carnage and stuff. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. And there were a lot of those because, I mean, you know the story of the sleeper on Rallos, but he stayed asleep for so long that gear off of the original Warders was prevalent. I still have a Mask of the Tinkerer sitting on my rogue from that time, and I might have a box somewhere as well.
Yeah. So you started as a paladin. Did you keep the paladin for a long time?
He never got past level 14, honestly. And it took me a couple months to get to level 14. It was that summer that I ended up making Dupree for the first time.
Was it a cleric?
It was. I've always played a cleric as my primary character. Buddy of mine had said, you know, you seem to be doing all right with the paladin, but you're really going to enjoy a cleric. You should go try him. They're so much more powerful. You can get more done. You know, you can solo. You don't have to always look for a group. I said, all right. So I gave a cleric a try and fell in love with it right away. It was an amazing character. I found that I did much better in the PvP realm with it.
Oh yeah.
So
a cleric really is just a better paladin.
It really is, at least especially early on, because back then resists weren't through the roof, so cleric nukes could land on characters, and yeah, I found it was much easier to defend myself and kill other players with the cleric, so it was great.
You know, early on in EQ, the hybrids didn't have a good identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were just the worst option for the two classes they combined. Like Rangers, like their bow shit sucked. Paladins didn't have any good group heals. And I mean, Shadow Knights were maybe the best, but they still just were like terrible DPS and couldn't use defensive. So it's like, why? So
yeah, they didn't do them justice early on because they could have been amazing back then. Now they're where they should be.
Right, I agree with that. Yeah.
But back then it was disappointing because I really loved the idea of the paladin, and it just didn't work out for me early on.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to get 50 on your cleric?
Oh gosh. It wasn't a year, but it was probably about 6 to 9 months. Again, on Rallos, everything was slower because you spent so much time fighting other players. You could get into a really solid experience group and it would be ruined 5 minutes later because you'd have characters attacking you.
And then it's a corpse run day.
Yeah, it was really rare to get a true grind session going there. I found out very later on that you had to be in one of the bigger guilds in order to experience that. And my first time around was not that, or I should say my first couple of years there was not that.
Yeah.
My first guild, we'll dive off into story time here for a second, was actually called the Mysterian Knights. They were a husband and wife, were the leader of the guild. Her name was Mysteria. So in game, and so they decided to make it the Mysterian Knights. They were all about protecting her. They were very role play-ish. It was really fun.
A lot of guilds back then were super into role play, which was a fun part of the experience.
They really were, and that was. I admittedly I completely dorked out with that. I had a lot of fun with it. But that's part of the reason why I joined them. There was another guild called the Bane of the Living, and they were almost exclusively gnomes, and they would tax the Minotaur Caves. So if you wanted to go into EXP in the Minotaur Caves, or if you wanted to go in there to farm minnow axes to sell, you had to pay their tax, and you were only allowed in there for a certain time. They were really well organized. It was pretty funny. they would time the amount of time you were in there, and if you were in there too long, you'd have to pay an additional tax, or they'd kill you.
That's amazing. That's what makes the game feel alive.
It is. And so they had Steam Font on lockdown. And I remember somebody had sold me on my Paladin a Minotaur X. And this gets way too complicated, but the Bane of the Living ended up coming and killing me. And they said, yeah, this guy didn't pay his taxes, so we're repossessing the X. Like, that was the item they took off my corpse. I don't know if it was a true story, if it was just complete bullshit and their excuse for killing me. But,
that's amazing, though.
Yeah, so I was very upset about it, and I was talking to this guy who was in the Mysterian Knights. They're like, yeah, we're battling these guys. We're trying to free Steam Font from their treachery. And I'm like, well,
Hell
sign
yeah.
me up. I'm in for this. Let's go kill him. And so the battle only lasted probably the course of a week or two. Like, eventually the Bane of the Living ended up disbanding because they pissed off enough people that they couldn't stay within their lane. So they were a short-lived early what we would call PK guild, but
right.
yeah.
I remember people when I was on Rallos Zek being like, "Oh yeah, don't join that guild. It's a PK guild," and I'm like, "Isn't that like the point?"
Sort of. So that was the label. You were either PK or anti-PK. So basically, just stood for player killer. We all killed players, but the PK guilds would do it randomly, no rhyme or reason. They would just do it to steal your stuff. They would do it because they felt like it. They would do things like camp the portal, so you would port in with a wizard port in Greater Feydark, for example, and there'd be 3 or 4 of them sitting right there. You get blinded, nuked down, and dead just like that.
Whereas anti-PK, we're solving disputes with PvP.
Exactly. We always painted ourselves as the heroes. The truth is that there were plenty of times where we used it to be assholes to other people, but we were at least consistent in being that asshole.
So if you're anti-PK, you have free reign when you see a PK guild to just take shots at them, right?
Yep, 100%. Yes, and that they labeled themselves that way. They got a reputation, and so basically everybody was against them. So there was no, well, you're picking on this guild. It was, they would literally do things like I just talked about, camp the portals and kill anybody who zoned in. They made a lot of money doing it that way. They got a lot of kill shots. Kill shots were a big deal. Everybody always took screenshots of the players they killed.
You had to post your little collage.
Yes. I actually ended up watching one last night because I was this part of the reason I didn't get to sleep when I should have, but I was watching one of the collages trying to see if I was in it. I was actually hoping to find my corpse in it.
Right.
Because it's a story I'll tell later, but it was a kill that really stuck with me, and I found one for that guild and was hoping I would find my corpse in there, but unfortunately I didn't. But yeah, the PK guilds were something else. Probably the most notorious throughout the entire existence of the server was Dark and Bane. And then Flowers of Happiness and Peacebreakers, which eventually became Peace of Formosa, who we experienced on Vulok. So
yeah, Peace of Formosa
it was Lockjaw.
Yeah, they were a nice guild to interact with.
They were on Lockjaw. We hated them on Rallos. I don't know if it was the cultural barrier or just their style of play. It was their style of play, honestly. They didn't mesh with the politics on the server.
Right. It's hard to interact with them with the language barrier. And I would imagine that so for people who don't know, Peace of Formosa was in a Far East guild, mostly like Japan, China, Korea.
Taiwan,
yep. So they were probably on when you guys were at your weakest for numbers, late on a weekend night, and suddenly like 50 Piece of Formosa or whatever their name was, they're rolling in deep. Yeah.
Yes. They were definitely something to handle. That was part of the thing that led to one of the wars, was they didn't respect the rotations that we had set up. So yeah, that was the Rebirth War, which we'll talk about later.
Okay. So you're in this guild. How long do you stay in the Knights of Mysteria?
Honestly, I wasn't there very long. I maybe 3 or 4 months. I ended up getting into an argument with the leader. I forget what it was about. I just ended up saying, you know what, this isn't the guild for me. I don't like the way you run things. I enjoyed our time together, but I'm going to go do my own thing. And so at the time, this was probably midsummer at this point, and I had moved out of my parents' house into the buddy of mine's house. Really interesting story. Lucky for a couple of teenagers. Not lucky for him in the sense that his grandmother had passed away during our senior year, and his mom was her only child. Well, his mom had a house, and so his grandmother left my buddy her house when she passed away. So he inherited a house at 18. Super lucky for him in that sense. Obviously, you don't want to lose a grandparent for it, but he didn't want to live in that house, so we worked it out with his mom where she would move into grandma's house and we would take over her house. And it was great because my rent was essentially property taxes. That's all they ended up charging me for it. So it was great. I was able to move out of my parents' house right away. And we had set up a game room in the basement with our computers, and he started playing EverQuest with me.
Then you can pay the rent in Platt, baby.
Just about, practically. But unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to get into RMT back then. But I remember we were sitting there for an entire day trying to come up with what's the best guild name we can come up with, and we debated it. We were like, we want something that seems like it was ordained by God, and we were totally being nerds about it. We were diving into the meanings of different words, looking at things in Latin and stuff like that. And we ended up coming out with a Divine Mastery.
That's a good one. That's a good name.
Yeah, so we had fun with it. I look back at it now going, God, we are complete nerds. We put way too much thought into that.
Right.
But we spent an entire day doing that, and we created the guild and just started recruiting random people. We had no rhyme or reason. We just wanted to find good people to hang out with. At this point, I think Midsummer was, I think, when they released Plane of Fear for the first time. And so, I mean, we still had no concept of raiding. I knew that there were dragons, but we were nowhere close to being of level to take them on. So we made the Divine Mastery, and we recruited some random people and had a good time with that. We did that guild for about a year and a half. That was when towards the end of that is when things started to die off, and I really started to look at getting into the raid scene full time. But yeah, so that was Canark came out mid 2000, I think.
I think it did, or maybe February of 2000.
That sounds right, because it would have been
it came out in April 14th of 2000. So
okay. But the epics didn't come out until like 6 months later, if I remember right.
Right. It was deep in Cunark when epics came out, which is like the whole thing with like Vishan's Peak is the end zone. It's full of weapons, and then epics just made those all suck. But then back then, you had barely any epics on the server. Even early in Velius, you barely had any epics. So
yeah, it was because I remember them being one of those things everybody had to figure out.
Right, so, big mystery.
Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those. I had made a lot of friendships with some of the bigger guilds, but I kept my small guild, so I would get invited as a guest on a lot of their raids.
Everybody needs a cleric.
Yes, so that's how I got a lot of my early raid gear. That's actually how I got my epic. I don't think I was in one of the raiding guilds, or maybe I just joined one. Because I put in all the work. This was before the Pearl Shards, so you had to camp Ragefire when he would spawn in Nagafin's Lair for the Cleric epic. So there was a lot of work to be put into it, and that was always a contentious thing to do. I'd sit in Nagafin's Lair all night long waiting to see if Ragefire would spawn, and there was always somebody who wanted to come kill you and take over the camp. So that was definitely we got to the point where we would get a wizard in there before they would log out for the night, and they would cast Gravity Flux and launch us up onto the wall.
Nice.
In Nagafin's Lair. So at least we were up above everybody. We could see when they were coming in. We weren't hidden by the wall or anything, and we just had to really hope that Nagafin himself wouldn't spawn.
Right.
So yeah.
What was the spawn time? Was it like random? You know what I mean? Or was there a certain timer?
I mean, honestly, I don't remember, because it was one of those, we didn't do a good job of tracking it.
Hmm.
At least not at my level at that point, because there were two large raid alliances on Rallos early. There was Sabbat and Synergy,
Hmm.
and they did all the killing. They had their own rotation set up to it. At least I assume so. I was never in the politics for that. They ended up having a massive war between the two groups that established the long-term rotations on Rallos.
Okay. So raid mobs early on became rotated on RZ.
Yeah, there was a lot of rotation, a lot of agreements. I don't know the early rules, but basically, it got to the point where everybody, for quality of life, they kind of had a set schedule that they would do, and so everybody agreed to those rotations. That's how the warders stayed asleep for so long on Rallos. Is they had set rules, nobody broke them, because they knew the impact of breaking them.
Right. Otherwise, every single raid mob was just a day-long clusterfuck all the time, right?
Yeah, it honestly was one of those things that um, we talk about, going back to your episode with Lyran and on Lockjaw as well, when they started to enforce the rotations because people were messing with each other's raids. On Rallos, all you had to do was zone in and kill the clerics.
Right. Easy.
That would wipe an entire guild instantly. So
Just roll up and click a golem metal wand on the tank while he's fighting, right?
yeah,
Just strip him.
all kinds of stuff. It literally was one of those that we'd be doing a CH rotation, and next thing I know, my clerics around me are being picked off one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd be, in TOV fighting Fulak or something.
Yeah. Oh,
so
yes. The CH rotations are super vulnerable to that sort of thing, too.
They are. So yeah, there were many massive PvP battles in the raid zones, and they got very interesting with all the mobs around. So
now, with those two raiding alliances that you talked about, were the
mm-hmm.
big three part of that yet? MiM, Wudan, and
no. So Ascending Dawn ended up forming after that first war. They were essentially Synergy.
Okay.
So if I'm remembering my history correctly here. So Synergy was a collection of smaller guilds that ended up forming into Ascending Dawn. So I know Fearful Symmetry was one of those guilds. Without having a list in front of me, it'd be hard to pick them out. But
Rallos
yeah,
Zek had some good guild names.
they did. They did. Yeah, they had the Begotten, Insanity's Edge. They had a lot of fun guild names. In fact, so Rallos was such the political server. There's actually a website out there that still has to date all of the player history tracked to it.
Nice.
One of the players on the server ended up parsing logs that were submitted to him, and it would show dates that characters joined guilds, that they left guilds, their entire guild history, all the players that were in a certain guild, whether they're still tagged as in that guild or not. He still maintains the website today. I think he stopped tracking towards the end of 2004 when it was clear that Rallos was going to be merged and there was no point anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it has all of the server's history on there. So I mean, I could pull up a list of guilds and just read off the names. But yeah, that entire history is still cataloged out on the internet for us.
Dang, that's awesome. If we get a chance after this, if you can hook me up with the website, I'll put a link in the description for folks to check out.
Yeah, I can do that. It's a neat website, but that just kind of describes how truly political that server was, because your movements were tracked.
Yes.
People had receipts.
Remember, people forget that back then there was no guild window. So someone joined your guild, you couldn't get a list of who all was in your guild.
No.
Yeah.
And it was really important to keep track of that from a PvP perspective, because you had to know who was in a guild. Yep, you had to know if somebody was potentially a spy, but it's one of those that when the fights would really break out on Rallos, people would go anonymous. So when you do a who in zone, you wouldn't get guild tags, so you had to know who was in what guilds quickly to know whether you had just zoned into potential danger or not. So
that is awesome.
And we would fight over EXP zones, control of them, things like that. There were plenty of times where we would be fighting over Sebelis, and we would just battle it out for hours. People dying left and right at the bubble, zoning in, and we would finally win control of it, and everybody, hooray, we're fantastic. People start EXPing, and then as we get tired throughout the night, we we start to log off and pass out, and the next morning the groups that were holding it gotten kicked out. And so now we're back
Right.
at it again,
Got to
and we
redo it
got
all.
our whopping 10% EXP that night before.
You got to claw for every crumb.
Right. That really was the way it was.
That's awesome, though. That sounds great.
It was. I really do look back at my time there on that server and think of it fondly because of the relationships we had.
So you mentioned Plane of Fear came out. When it first came out, there wasn't a requirement to be level 46 to enter, right?
I don't believe there was, no.
So did you guys go check it out, even though you were probably below 46 at the time?
I remember traveling there and talking to some people, and we didn't end up zoning in. They had basically just told us that, this is. I talking to one of the bigger guilds and asking them what goes on in here, like what's this zone all about? Because we were sitting outside, we had fought through the
specs.
Thank you. I was drawing a blank on what they were called, but we had fought through them and gotten to the portal, and I was like, this is so cool. And then I conned the Cinderella or whatever her name is sitting right in front of the portal.
Oh yeah, the erudite there.
Yes, and
I think there's like a GM event where she opened the portal or something, right?
I think so. Yeah, she was bright red to me though, and I was like, I'm not even going to try this. Not interested. Right. I remember the Plane of Hate opening way more because I was still very noobish for Fear, but yeah, I remember talking to him, and I couldn't have been more than in my mid-teens with my Cleric at this point. And I was like, yeah, this doesn't sound like a good idea, guys. Let's maybe just bug out and go find something else to do.
Yeah.
So we would have zoned in, instantly lost our corpses, and never seen them again.
Yeah.
Because this was back when you had to go loot your corpse. So yeah. And that was much harder to do on a PvP server when people were there to kill you as well. So
the impact that had on the gear must have been crazy. Like suddenly you had people running around in like Fear armor or lustrous russet armor and stuff shortly after that. I mean, you probably had to be up in the higher end to even see the effects, but opening the planes must have been wild on Rallos Zek. Can you talk about Hate?
So Hate, I just remember the event in Kithakor because I remember going to participate in it. Because they did, I forget the name of what they called it, but it was the
Bloody Kithakor?
Bloody Kithakor, that's it, yes. I remember going to that because there was some big battle it was like a GM event that they did.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting killed by a random player in it while I was there, but I just remember going to check it out because I'd seen the server-wide announcements, and I think I was in Freeport at the time, so I was like, well, this is close by. Let's just go. Yeah, people were talking about it in Guild, like things, I guess I don't know if there were server-wide announcements, but people were like, there's all kinds of undead spawning in Kithakor, and it's a GM event, everybody get here. So we all started heading that way, and then I remember people talking about the Plane of Hate had opened up, and I was so excited to go see it. And we spent like 3 or 4 days searching for how to zone in. It had to be a zone point somewhere, so we were scouring every single map, and because we didn't know any better, all we had to do was really ask one of the bigger guilds, and they probably would have told us that, no, you got to port up there with a wizard. But we spent hours looking for that zone and only to find out that we had to get a wizard just to port us up.
Yeah.
So I remember going to Plane of Hate early and just dying, and I had to get help from some of my friends who were in the bigger guilds to recover my corpse. Ended up losing a lot of platinum that night because I had to pay for all the stones to get them up there, and we assembled a couple groups just to get to the zone in. And you probably never played when Plane of Hate was its original form, did you?
I played, but I was definitely not going to Plane of Hate.
Okay, all right. So yeah, it was a multi-level zone. There was an upstairs and a downstairs, and the pathing was terrible.
Yeah, I remember hearing that like when you zone in, you just get jumped from Z-axis all over the place.
Yes, and you had to basically navigate the zone by crawling along the walls. The walls were slanted, so you would
they would go
slide up them. Yep. So we would navigate the zone high up on the walls, and eventually we managed to get my corpse because, like an idiot, I zoned in and I cast my invulnerability as soon as I got attacked and ran off, and so we had to find my corpse. So
nice.
Fortunately, again, that just goes to speak to what Rallos was all about. You had friends; they were willing to drop whatever they were doing at the time to come help you. That
Right.
was just the nature of the server. Didn't matter if it was a PvP battle or you just needed help recovering your corpse. That's the way people were.
So do you remember who got that first like CT, that first interrupt? Do you know?
I don't.
Probably one of
On
those rating alliances though.
Yeah, there definitely weren't server wides back then, so I didn't pay any attention to any of that. Honestly, I know that it would have been either Sabbath or Synergy. If I
Hmm.
had to guess, I would say it was probably Synergy, just because I think they were ultimately the more powerful one early on. But it could have
Yeah.
been Sabbath as well, because I think Sabbath was the older rating alliance.
Okay. And AD would go on to become like kind of the top of the three guild meta later on, right?
Yes, they definitely were the original power guild, that kind of was the number one throughout. So give me 1 second. I forgot to plug in my laptop and its power's going to die.
So can you jump in? Was there anything big with Plane of Sky opening, or was that kind of just like not a big deal?
Um, I remember it opening, just because it came before Canark, because it was originally intended to be Canark
Yeah.
content, and they opened it so that we had something to do. Um, Honestly, I don't remember anything too big about it.
Okay.
As I said earlier, Rallos was always really behind in the progression because we were too
Yep.
busy fighting ourselves. So
It would be really expensive to have a PvP battle in Plane of Sky too.
it would. They occurred, but back then it also wasn't one of those things. People really didn't screw around in Plane of Sky because the keys weren't permanent; they were temporary. So as soon
Yeah.
as you zoned out, I think even when you died, potentially you might have lost the keys. Originally, I think they changed that aspect of it, because it
Yes.
made the zone way too hard. But
Yeah.
you definitely lost them when you zoned out. So we would spend days camping, um, Plane of Sky, and stay logged in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember rating my first Plane of Sky, going, "Thank God I have cable internet. There's no chance for an interruption here."
Oh, that would be terrible. Getting DC'd and then your keys are gone.
Yes,
And that
that
was so
definitely
common
occurred.
back then.
It really was. So yeah, that happened to a lot of players, and so I remember just that thought, that thank God I have cable internet.
Yeah. All right. So you're still in your own guild, you and your friend's guild at this point. Kunark comes out. Are you guys still in it?
We are. It was, we had, I don't want to call it, made it a role play guild, but we had a story. My buddy was a dark elf and I was a high elf, so we had a whole story on how we role played as brothers,
Okay.
and so we had a story of how that all came about. Um, we we were still doing our own thing there. Yeah, I even remember doing things like weddings for people in the game and characters who wanted to get married. Um, that was that was really big back then, because the GMs would show up, they'd bring wedding cake, they would shoot off fireworks for you,
They would change your surname.
they would change your surname. Yep. One of the weddings that I really remember was actually just off of the Butcher Block docks. So we had the boats in the background,
Mm.
and it was for a couple members of my guild, who later on went to join MIM, and so that was a big reason why I ended up joining MIM at the time that I did, because they were there. But I married them in game, and they later on got married in real life, had kids together. It was just kind of fantastic. So
Well, that's cool. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I still remember that very well, doing that wedding that day. I wish I still had the script that I typed up, but
It must have been dangerous to have a wedding on Rallos Zek.
it was. But you always found obscure locations to do that. So
Yeah.
just kind of to give you an idea, if you're running to the docks in Butcher Block and you're following the path, just before you get to the gate of the docks, we veered off to the right and went into that little nook over there, where nobody
Yeah.
really had any. There were no mobs over there. There was no reason for anybody to wander that way. So
Yeah.
that's we picked that location because it was kind of a nice scenery, but also secure. And usually when we were doing something like that, the GMs were there, so people stayed away. They didn't get involved.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. GMs would come out for those things all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
back
That
when
was
they
that
had a
was a
real GM force.
it was a cool part. I was talking on my stream about weddings the other day in EQ, and literally everyone in chat had a story about weddings on their server. Like, it was so common. People today would never believe it if they weren't back then.
Yeah.
Weren't there back then. But like, seriously, everybody almost knew somebody who had gotten like in-game married. You know what I mean? And like all the different spots people pick out, they always want these beautiful secluded locations. It was a big part of the game. Yeah.
It really was. And so as a cleric, I got to do a number of weddings. It was always really fun when I got asked. I always felt honored. So
Oh, that is so. Yeah, I didn't even put it together that you were a cleric, so of course you'd be the one they go to.
yep.
That's great.
Yeah, no, we had a lot of fun with that, but we were definitely still in our own guild in Canark. So um, I remember thinking at the time, because I had just really gotten into raiding the plains at this point. I think I had one or two pieces of gear from up there, because again, I would always go as a guest, so I would get whatever the scraps or remnants were that was left over.
Now, when you were raiding the plains, you were the guest and everything, but were you guys mostly doing the trash mobs, or were you occasionally on like an Interrupt and CT kill?
I was occasionally on an Interrupt kill. I don't know that I killed CT early on. But I didn't have a lot of interest in going to Plane of Fear just because nothing really dropped there for me.
That's true, right? You wanted that ethereal mist.
Yep.
That purple, purple cleric with yellow shoes.
Yeah, I remember though the first time I killed Interrupt, I remember walking in and my first thought was, God, this guy is ugly. They couldn't have come up with a better looking, Prince of Darkness. Like, what is this? But yeah, I remember it was very, very strategic raids because of that Z axis and Plane of Hate. But
yeah, if you got too close to the ceiling, it would aggro everything above you, right? And pull them down in a huge train.
It would. There was not, they hadn't really built in that the floor blocking aggro access. So yeah
now
the Z axis caused a lot of problems.
I'm guessing you were a high elf, right?
I was. Yeah. Okay, I've always played the same character.
As a person who dabbles in the RP realm, how fulfilling was it for you, the high elf cleric, to kill Interrupt, the god of hate?
It was a lot of fun, and so that was another thing I did is I found out about the Red Wine Quest in Neriak very early on, and so I spent entirely too much platinum at the time because platinum was harder to come by back then. But I got myself ally in parts of Neriak because of that quest. And I loved it because I would be walking through the town and you would get some random dark elf who was role playing. And they're like, oh, high elf, I have to kill him. And they would attack me and the dark elf guards would kill him.
That's amazing.
Oh, I had so much fun with that. It used to piss people off. Like, why are my own guards? I'm like, dude, I'm your guards like me better than they do you.
Right.
And I tied that into my buddy and our story of how we were brothers because it was really kind of a stupid story, but I'm going to story time again. So I'm going to delve off here.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'd graduated high school together and we went out to California. And he had just started playing the game. But we were out on California kind of as like a vacation to congratulate ourselves for graduating high school. Went to stay with my aunt who lived out there. We went to Disneyland. It was great. But we were talking to my cousin and trying to describe this game to her. And she's like, well, you guys have to come up with a story of like how your characters interact. And so while we were on that trip, we decided that we were going to be brothers. But we're like, how does that work? Because you're a dark elf and I'm a high elf. And so we came up with the story that our mother was actually a wood elf who was captured by Ambassador Devin and hauled off to Crushbone. And he raped her and got her pregnant. And so my buddy was the bastard stepbrother that I have.
Wow.
And so so that was our story. And, kind of a terrible story, but it explained how a dark elf and a high elf identified as brothers. And then we tied it in that I had ally access or ally status in parts of Neriak.
People must have been blown away just seeing. I remember like the first time I saw like a troll in Kanos walking around, I was like, wait a second, what? You know what I mean? Like, it was very uncommon back then, or even more crazy. Like if you ever saw an Ixar with faction, he could walk around. All that was always wild to see.
Yeah. And I mean, admittedly, I didn't spend a lot of time in Neriak because even though the guards would assist me, it was still one of those places where I walked in and a lot of people wanted to kill you because you're a high elf automatically. There was a lot of that role play going on. So it was just one of those things where I enjoyed it the few times I did it, but I definitely didn't hang out there.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because like at the end of the day, there's not a lot to do there once you're a higher level and stuff.
I would use the bank and buy some food and get out.
Right. Yeah, I guess those were the two big things, right? You always wanted to have easy access to a bank and food and
Yes,
water.
I definitely used it a lot more when I started raiding Nagafen on a semi-regular basis. So yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to get 60 when Kunark came out?
Um, you know what? I'm gonna look. I can tell you that. I can give you the
Ooh,
exact day, just as a fun.
exciting.
So Dupree, maybe not the exact day, but the first time that somebody registered me as 60, I was nope. Yep, here it is. It says January 30th of 2002.
Whoa, my goodness. So it's just under 2 years.
Again, it was one of those you did not spend a lot of time EXPing. You spent most of your time. That was when I really wanted to get heavy into the raid scene. I had my epic before I was 60.
Right.
I spent more time PvPing than I did EXPing back in the day for sure. So yeah, that was about the time that I started to really get serious about things. I had left my current guild, the Divine Mastery, and joined another guild, Swarm of Fear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I hit 60. That guild quickly folded and reformed under another name, Shadow of the Swarm. And they were a big StarCraft guild, so that's why Swarm was part of their name.
That makes sense. There's a lot of guilds that came from StarCraft back in the day.
They did. That was one of them. MiM came from Ultima Online. They were big in Ultima Online before.
It seems like a lot of the best early game guilds came from Ultima because they came in already organized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Fires of Heaven, Fur was big in Ultima Online before he came over to EQ. And so they were like a top in the beta.
Yeah. That it's funny because listening to your episode with Quarkin, that was the first one I listened to after you asked me to do this, and I was like, oh God, I got to follow Quarkin. I mean, this guy's a legend. But then hearing him talk about how he fangirls over Führer and those guys, and I'm like, God, I sit there and think Quarkin's a legend. So
yeah,
Did I talk
about Krugen from EOE and FOH on that Lyran episode?
Krugen, I don't remember that. No,
he was a monk in EOE, but he was a Fires of Heaven paladin. And since I played a paladin back in the day, he was like someone to me was like basically a comic book character, right? Because I read the news updates and he was the paladin who had Inti Akira's Sword of Death. You know what I mean? That crazy sword that dropped one time in Plane of Sky. And then he played on Vulak, and I was like, oh shit, that's the guy. And like, where do I see him? He's training me. Sweet, because he's in EOE and I'm in Faceless.
God, EOE was so terrible, but it was fun for me, but I'm sure not as much fun for you.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot. You know what I mean? Before Vulak, I was like, I think everyone should share, and in the world, everything should be equitable, and we should all just accept the same standard of living. And after Vulak, I was like, listen, if I can beat you to that piece of cake, I'm eating it. Okay.
Right. Well, and that's why I really appreciated that episode with Lyran, because just listening to, again, as I mentioned, that was Rallos Zek to a T. We shared very well, but it was player and force sharing. There were no calling the GMs. If you screwed up, we were just going to kill you, and we were going to kill you over and over again for months until you learned your lesson.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it should be. It should be handled in universe, in game, right? For the verisimilitude of the product. When you have to go to GMs, it takes a little bit out of the interaction.
It really does. It was very rare that the GMs ever really got involved in Rallos. They were ever so present. We had a real life meetup in, I want to say it was 2003, where a bunch of us went to LA to party it up for a weekend, and a couple GMs, couple developers came out and hung out with us. It come to find out that one of the developers, or one of my guild leaders, was actually a developer in secret for EverQuest. We had no idea, at least I had no idea, that he was a developer. But yeah, I got picked up at the airport by one of the GMs and driven to the party. It was a great time. We had a lot of fun at that get together.
Was that when you were in MiM?
Yes. No, it was just before I joined MiM.
Oh, okay.
It was Would have been summer of 2003, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Do you remember what
And
guild you were in?
mm, I think I was in Shadow of the Swarm.
Shadow of the Swarm. Look at them. Pocket
No,
GM
no,
having.
actually, I lied. I was in Reverent.
Okay.
Yeah, so I joined Ascending Dawn for a short period of time there. That didn't work out. That's actually one of those things that unfortunately was well known for on Rallos. Um, the incident, or the infamous video card incident with my character. My video card died, and
Okay.
I knew nothing about computers. Um, I worked in a lumber yard at the time. Like now, I can build my own PCs.
Yeah.
I've learned, but at the time, my video card died. I didn't even know it was my video card. Like I had to have a friend come over and tell me what was going on with my computer. I didn't have the money to buy a new video card, so there was like a 3 month period where I couldn't play EverQuest, 3 or 4 months.
Oh.
And I had communicated to somebody that my video card died. When I logged back in, I wasn't in the guild anymore. So I sent the leader a tell, and she's like, "Yeah, we don't buy your story. Yeah." I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, I literally know nothing about computers." I finally got the money scraped up. I was making next to nothing driving a forklift in a lumber yard, just above minimum wage. And I didn't care at the time because I didn't have to pay rent, so I never saved any money. I mean, my
Right.
rent was $125 a month, so it was peanuts. And so I worked as little as possible so I could play EverQuest all the time. So I had to ramp it up, find somebody who could fix my computer because, again, I played EverQuest most of the time. I didn't have any friends who could do this stuff for me.
Right.
So, but
So what she
yeah,
think she think you were a spy or something?
I don't know what it was. Her name was Adele. I mean, I don't hold anything against her to this day, but it was just one of those, like, we had a severe disagreement about it. And I was like, I want to come back. And she's like, no, we don't buy your story. You're out. And I was like, okay, that's, I'm sure she remembers it a little bit differently, but it is what it is. So, buddy of mine was starting up, or had started Reverent out of the um, ashes of Swarm of Fear again. Shadow of the Swarm had died off at that point. And so it was another group of them that was just trying to stick together. And so they created Reverent, and I joined them for a few months until I joined MiM.
Okay. So man, Shadow of the Swarm was having a rough time. Like,
Yeah, but this was, I mean, they had existed over the course of 3 years, just in
okay,
the
so
two different.
yeah, so it is a long time.
Yeah, especially back in those days.
Yeah. Was it just
They
leadership
definitely.
instability?
So that was actually the guild with the developer. It was
Hmm.
Raitan, if you remember his name.
I remember Raitan. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was the original leader of Swarm of Fear, and then when he kind of stepped away from the guild, that's when they ended up reforming into Shadow of the Swarm. So he was a member then of Shadow of the Swarm, but he wasn't playing near as much. So he was very much so into development of expansions. I think he actually switched to he might have switched to the EQ2 team. I don't remember the history there, but good dude. Still friends with him on Facebook. We don't really
Nice.
talk as much as we did way back in the day, but he's a good guy. It was at that 2003 meetup that I learned he was a developer. Like I had no clue. Um, but yeah, he. So Shadow of the Swarm existed, I want to say, for about a year and a half, and then they died off, and Reverent formed out of one of their members who wanted to try to keep things going, and I ended up becoming one of his officers. But it was a short-lived guild.
Yeah.
That was that the leader at the time. Then he graduated college, was starting to get into his career,
Oh yeah,
and
graduating college is the death knell for EverQuest back
it
then.
definitely can be. So yeah, that was the end of that, and that's when I got into MIM at that point. But
Really
just from
quick,
a guild history perspective.
funny story about Raitan. Raitan, I think, I'm pretty confident Raitan was the lead designer for Underfoot, which is one of the most famous EverQuest expansions. It killed a shit ton of guilds because it was super hard.
Yeah.
But nowadays, like, people like it because so many of the expansions are just face roll easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's been retuned, so it's still very hard, but not
Yeah.
like kill you hard. But yeah, Raitan
Underfoot.
was the guy behind that.
Yeah, Underfoot was one of the last live expansions that I played actively. I quit, I think, in the middle of House of Thule, which I believe comes right after Underfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was when I quit live with Triton and moved on.
And I mean, that was right around the time that Fippy in Vulek came out, right? So you went right over to Vulek after that. Because I remember I was messing around in House of Thule when Fulak came out.
Yeah, I was really disappointed with the timing of the Sleeper and the Combine because I wanted to play them, but I had committed to myself I was not going to play EverQuest while I was going to school. I wanted to get my college degree. I wanted to get it done quickly. I wanted to do it in less than the prescribed time. So I wanted to get in, get out, and I knew that EverQuest was not going to allow for that. So
that's good that you had the discipline to not sabotage yourself.
I've done that twice. I have 2 college degrees now, and both times I put the game away entirely while I got those done.
It's like a superpower what you could do when you don't play EverQuest.
Yeah, it's amazing how much time you have, right?
Yeah. Okay, so they die, and now you join MiM.
Yep. So that was
Luckland
in the
Pop-ish.
Yeah, early Pop era, I believe it was.
Okay.
So I joined MiM, and I mean, I had been pretty into the raid scene at that point.
But now you're becoming a hardcore raider, right?
I would even say the other guilds were hardcore. We were just behind Ascending Dawn and MiM. So Swarm of Fear especially, like we were in the plains on a regular basis. We definitely killed Trakenon. We didn't raid Vishan's Peak, but by the time we got into it, like VP, it's most of the loot is weapons, and those weapons were negated by the epics.
Yeah, so, VP hard zone, pain in the dick to get keyed.
Yes,
like just fuck it. Kunark was a 6-month expansion. Who had time for it?
There was no value in going into VP. So, but we had dabbled in the raiding Valius and some of Luckland, but not anything super hardcore because a lot of that stuff was all open world and it was rotated by the bigger guilds. So we didn't get into that. We were always a little bit behind them, but we definitely raided on a regular basis. And going back to when I first joined Ascending Dawn, that was my first experience with what I would call a guild that truly has their shit together.
Yeah,
like we would go and we would we would raid everything and we'd do fine, but like they had strategy and they had everything down. And one of my first raids with them was actually to Sleeper's Tomb.
Nice.
I had gotten a key like a night or two before because nobody needed keys at that point. They had been doing it for months.
So you walk in as an app and like, boom, here's your key.
Yeah, pretty much. But I remember fighting through the zone, and then we got down to where the warders were, and I really like I can still remember it today. I always play in first person. That's something that my friends still make fun of me. They're like, dude, how can you play in first person? I'm like, it's the only way I've ever played, so it's what I do.
Yeah.
But I was down there standing on the bridges for the warders, and we engaged the first warder down there. And I just remember, I was doing my healing, and then all of a sudden I turned my perspective and looked up. And when I looked up, I could just see, a rain of arrows flying overhead. And I was just like, holy crap, what is this? Like, this is going to be a different experience rating. And I think that's a big reason why I went to MiM after after I lost my spot in Ascending Dawn. I had wanted to get back into that with a guild that actually knew their stuff. I enjoyed my time with my buddies in Rivariant, but as that started to die off, it was clear to me that that's where I wanted to be, was back with one of the big boys.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I can close my eyes and picture that, seeing those arrows rain overhead in that zone. It was the coolest thing I had seen.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing like the first time you get with a real organized raid force that operates like a machine,
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so that was a lot of fun for me. But so now I was in MiM. And that kind of happened. I might be tying my timelines differently here. It's funny now that it's been 20 years practically. I have a hard time remembering the exact timelines of stuff, but that was around the time of the Rebirth War, which was the largest conflict that the server had. That was basically the entire server was at war at that point.
What was the reason?
Raiding mobs. So Rebirth was a raiding alliance of the Peacebreakers, which would later become Peace of Formosa. I'm going to butcher this name, but the guild was Facultas Utrim Q or something like that. They had I don't know if it's Latin or whatever it was. It was a really interesting name, but they were a smaller guild of very skilled players. I don't even know if they ever reached 50 people in total. Like, they were pretty small.
It's always cool to see that, like the small elite guilds.
Yes, but they were largely known as PK guilds because they just didn't give a fuck. And most of them raided at night, or played at night when we were all sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
So the repercussions were pretty minimal for them. But they didn't really want to respect the rotation. And so, yeah, it became one of those things that Ascending Dawn and MiM and Wudan ended up going to war with them, and the rest of the server got drug into it. It was a pretty massive war. I feel like it lasted at least 4 to 6 months.
Wow.
So that goes back to that watching that video with the screenshots last night that I was looking for my corpse that I told you about earlier.
Yeah. So at that point, everyone is just kill on sight, right? Like, you're walking around hunting people.
Yes. Like, we would log in, and instead of going to EXP or raid, we would form hunting parties.
Hell yeah, that's awesome.
Because it was one of those things. So I was sitting in Velk's lab, trying to get some experience. I don't remember. I was leveling AAs at that point. But I was sitting in Velk's lab, just shooting the breeze with my buddies. And as I was just sitting there typing, all of a sudden I was instantly dead. And I was like, what the hell happened? And then I saw you've been slain by, I think it was, his name was, I'm going to butcher it, but it was one of their rogues. At first I thought maybe it was one, but as I come to think of it, it wasn't a female rogue. Their most famous one was a female rogue. It was an alt of one of their druids. But he landed a double backstab while I was sitting and killed me instantly.
Yeah, max damage twice, right?
Yep. So I was dead instantly, and I remember just being shocked, but also impressed.
Right.
Like, it disappointed in myself because you never, like, you always checked zone population to make sure nobody had come in that you didn't want there. But I feel like I was sitting somewhere in the zone where I felt comfortable. Of course, it would be a rogue who can navigate the zone safely on their own that got me. But yeah, I was just instant death. And I remember sending him a tell like, well played. That was very well done. I didn't even see you coming. But that was one of the PvP deaths that just stuck with me in my life. So I was hoping that screenshot was part of that collage last night, because it was a collage of just that guild's kills during that time of the big guilds.
Now, did PK guilds respect loot and scoot, or was it like your corpse was going to be camped?
Some of them did, some of them didn't. It was kind of just whoever felt like, or whatever their personal preference was. So, okay. Yeah. They really didn't have a lot of rules tied to that. Usually, if they were going to camp your corpse to the point where it would rot, people would get a GM involved at that point, because that was just dirty. Like, people spent too much time on their characters. Yeah, and it was incredibly rare for somebody to be like that, to sit on your corpse for 3 hours. You really had to piss them off for them to be willing to do that. Yeah. So it was pretty rare the GMs got involved. In fact, my entire time on Rallos, I only got one warning for harassment of a player. I had been attacked in Eastern Wastes. I was out there doing something. I may have just been traveling through. I don't recall. But I got attacked by a necromancer. And Cleric versus a necro was a terrible, terrible fight. I could cure everything and dispel everything that they had on me. Whenever you traveled on Rallos, you didn't travel not fully buffed and ready to go, because you could be jumped at any time. Right. And so, I mean, I always had a set of spells that I had up for traveling, and a couple of those spells were always cure disease and cure poison. I had my variations of that set up so that I could instantly, get rid of any dots or anything that I needed to. I kept my first few buff slots open, so if I had to dispel something. And so I just wiped the floor with him. But when I killed him, I knocked him unconscious. And I was really irritated that day. So I just left him unconscious there. And he would stand up. No, he would stand up, and I'd hit him with a level 1 nuke and knock him back down. Oh. And this went on for about 45 minutes to an hour. And he had slowly over the time like limped himself to the Kale zone line, and before he was going to zone, that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to kill you now. I wasn't going to let him actually reach the zone line. But I just toyed with him the whole time. Like I'd let him run 10 feet and then I'd knock him down again. Well, he ended up petitioning during this time. So when I finally killed him, then I got the message, you've been summoned by the gods. I was like, oh, fuck. And I was actually a guide in the GM program. So this was a big deal at that point because I was getting a warning for player harassment on my account while I was a guide. So that was the end of my time as a guide. But yeah, the GM's like, that if you would have killed him much sooner, I would have let this go. But at this point in time, this turned into player harassment. So I'm giving you a warning, not a suspension. Don't do this again. So yeah, that was the one time that I got truly in trouble with the GMs for harassing a player on Rallos.
You always knew it was bad when you saw that you had been summoned by the gods.
Yeah. Yep. Which it's funny because as my time as a guide, that was always one of my favorites was that summon command, and you still got that message even if it was just a guide summoning you.
Oh, really?
At least I think it was because I mean it was just the /summon command. But I remember, not that this is related to Rallos, but as my time as a guide, like this guy wouldn't stand still. Like every time I summoned him, he just kept running like he had no idea what the hell was going on. Or he was just trying to play like, I'm not going to stand still. And the guides couldn't teleport to those jail cells. We didn't have that access. So I just had to keep summoning him in place, and eventually I messaged GM. I'm like, this guy won't stand still, and he won't talk to me. So they ended up getting in. But it was funny because I probably did that command like 50 times on the guy before he got summoned to the jail cell. He just had no interest. He kept trying to run away. So, so yeah. But yeah, what next?
So, in Planes of Power, did you get into Plane of Time with MiM?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
We ended up clearing it. I don't remember when. It was towards the end of our time on Zek before it merged over, or before the merge occurred.
Okay.
But yeah, I remember going through Plane of Time.
Okay. And now I guess it's time to talk about the trip back to Sleeper's Tomb. Were you there?
Yes, I was.
There we go.
I actually found that was one of the things that I was digging through last night because I was trying to find some sort of proof that I was there. Because all my screenshots are back on. I burned them on DVDs, and those are all packed away in boxes since I'm moving. So I was like, I gotta have something on my computer. And I ended up finding one screenshot that wasn't actually my screenshot. It just happens to have me in the background. I'm like, yes, there it is.
There we go. Proof.
Yes, proof that I was there. But yeah, I was. So that whole incident arose because one of the monks in Ascending Dawn, Stinkfist, had no interest in. There was some sort of falling out. I don't remember what it was, but we were far enough along in the server that pretty much anybody could get a Sleeper's Tomb key.
Right. No one's locking that shit down 2 expansions later.
No, and the PK guilds had started to get Sleeper's Tomb keys and were starting to creep in there, but they didn't know what they were doing. So
yeah,
they were just doing it to farm weapons, the avatar weapons. They weren't interested in really necessarily going to kill the sleeper, but Stinkfist was pissed off about something. And so he decided that he was going to rally those guys because he had fallen in with them after he got kicked from Ascending Dawn. And so they were going to go wake up the sleeper. And I remember hearing about this the night after they attempted it, because it ended up being a big PvP battle in Sleeper's Tomb to keep him from waking the sleeper. And the big three decided, we've kept him sleeping this long. We're going to be the ones to wake this up. Like, we can't control it. We can't police this anymore. It's an around the clock
24/7, right?
Exactly. It was, the way the story goes, at least the way it was told to me, is that they were on the last warder. And it was, the warder was like under 10%. And one of the Shadow Knights like harm touched somebody, and it managed to save it at the tail end. Like we had just barely kept the sleeper from being woken up. Now that's the way the story was. I'm sure there was some embellishment there,
of
making
course.
it more epic of a battle than it really was. But it was still a good story to tell, and so we rallied the troops and we said, we're going to wake the sleeper. Then this is going to be a coordinated effort between the 3 guilds that had kept us sleeping so long. So we, I just the clear down there was pretty mundane. The zone was really really laggy. We had somewhere in the neighborhood of 180 to 200 people in that zone.
Honestly,
at
it's
any
less
given
than I
time.
expected. I thought it was going to be like over 300.
There were points where it was definitely over 300 or over 200 people in the zone, but I know they had a lot of people just watching from the zone line, so they ended up kicking some of those people out because the lag was killing us.
Yeah.
It was next to impossible to navigate. So they ended up talking to some of the people and saying, please just zone out, join the chat channel. We'll keep you informed on what we're doing. Which is funny because the chat channels just exploded, especially server wide, when everybody from the other servers really started to catch on what was happening. I was probably in 10 or 15 chat channels of the different server wide ones, just giving updates for people. But we cleared down there, and we had no intention of actually beating the sleeper.
Right.
The reality of it was we were just going to be the ones who woke him up. We weren't going to let somebody else take that from us.
Right.
So we got down there and we were fighting him, and it became very apparent to us because we wanted to keep the fight going as long as we could. It became really apparent that we could res faster than he could kill people. I mean, we had an army of like 30 clerics there, all with their epics. So it was just a
Right.
matter of, every time he killed somebody, he only double attacked. So it's, he would sometimes, most of the time, he would one shot it. Every once in a while, somebody would survive 2 rounds. But
you're like, wait a second.
yeah, like it was one of those. He'd lose a percent, 10 minutes later, he'd lose another percent, and we're like, we're not dead yet, and he's going down. So it quickly became one of those things. The guilds were talking to each other like, we could actually do this. And so we kept grinding away at him, and we lost so much EXP.
Yeah.
I didn't lose that much being a cleric because I was just rezzing. But every once in a while, I would get, all the clerics would get summoned just from proximity or whatever it was, because nobody really had a ton of aggro built up. Because we would die, we'd come back with res effects, and it was a very, very slow fight.
But all you had to do is click the stick, right, and you're functional. So.
And I would do something stupid once in a while, like run up and try to nuke him just to help. I don't remember if any of them actually landed or not, but trying to be badass. But yeah, we kept rezzing, and the fight was like 3 to 4 hours to get him to the 27%, because initially we had no idea what we were doing, but we got more organized as the fight went on, and then all of a sudden he was just gone. It was mid 20%. I think the official story is 27%.
Yeah,
but he was just gone, and we were all like, "What the fuck happened?"
right. Because at that point, you're like, "We're doing it. It's happening."
Yeah, this is happening, and it was just instant outrage. Like, all the guilds were pissed. The cross channel server chats were all like, everybody was just angry. It was really kind of cool to see, because the whole EverQuest community was pissed for us. I remember going to the forums, and there were just posts after posts like, "I'm quitting this game. How can you do that to these guys?"
Right.
Like, we were all really angry. Everybody from each guild, we flooded their petition system. Like,
yeah,
everybody filed petitions. So they instantly got a petition from practically everybody else on Rallos, just angry over this.
Yeah.
And I remember the leaders of the guilds at the time. At this point, I was just, a member of MiM. I wasn't anybody important, but the leaders of the guilds were all trying to talk to their connections. I even remember sending a message off to Raitan saying, "Dude, this isn't right. Like, how could they do this to us?"
Right.
And I mean, he sent me a message back just saying, "I know they're looking into it. I don't know all the details. I'll see what I can find out tomorrow."
Yeah.
But I was angry. I didn't even leave Sleeper's Tomb that night. I camped right on top of his bubble, just pissed. And the next morning, I remember waking up, and I was just, I almost felt dead inside, like we had been cheated out of something so amazing.
Something great was stolen from you.
It really was. And I'm sure a lot of players felt that way, because he wasn't supposed to be beaten. This was just something that we did. But we yeah, so I think I went to work that day, maybe. Um, I don't remember, but I remember logging back into EverQuest, and I was back on that bubble, just sitting there. And I still wasn't leaving the zone. It was like a protest for me. So I was hanging out, talking to the guild, and then all of a sudden I remember looking over and one of the warders was up. And so this is kind of my little bit of claim to fame, as I was one of the first people to discover they'd put him back. But I remember looking and I was like, one of the warders is up. And so I sent a message in guild. And again, I play in first person and I'm sitting on top of his bubble. So I didn't notice the sleeper right away. And somebody had asked, well, is the sleeper back up? And I looked straight down, and sure enough, he was like right below me. I was like, oh my God, guys, he's back up. Like, let everybody know. And so they put a guard on the sleeper's tomb while we got everybody back together, so that there was no chance anybody could sneak in, no shenanigans. But we formed back up and cleared back down, and sleeper attempt number 2 got started, and that fight was much faster.
Really
that
quick,
one,
before you go on that one, did they give you GM reses when they fucked you over?
Nope.
You guys have a lot of EXP to make up.
It was a lot of people had lost a lot of EXP, but
damn,
yeah, there were people who were 60 that were no longer 60. That they were well into 59. I'm sure there were a couple that maybe even dipped to 58.
And that's taking 97% reses every time, right?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of EXP lost that night. But yeah, they put him back up, and so we fought back down, and that fight was probably right around 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours.
Did you have way more people now that people were like, oh shit, we could do it?
I think some more people showed up. Yeah. It turned into the same circus. Multiple channels, cross server. I did the same thing. I joined a bunch of them just to give updates from ground zero.
I remember the second attempt. I was in a chat channel on the Nameless listening, and it was like I could barely read my chat box. There was so much activity. It was like crazy. Everyone was hyped. There was like websites that were already posting about it. I mean, it was the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in EQ at that point, and I wasn't even on Rallos Zek.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny because it truly was something to experience. It was something to be a part of. But at the time, I don't know that the gravity of what that event was really landed on me.
Right.
I look back at it now, and some people call it one of the greatest MMO moments in internet gaming history, which it's fun. But at the same time, if I could trade that and go back to Rallos just the way it was, I'd still do that, because the community and everything still means more to me than that individual kill does.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know about MMO history, but I think it's the greatest moment in EQ history.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the greatest, but I think, there's a number of websites out there that have ranked the different things that have happened in all the MMOs, and that one always gets referenced.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah.
But I mean, to me, it was a great moment. I had a lot of fun with it. I'm probably downplaying it more than I should. But it was one of those things where I don't think the true gravity of it really landed on me at the time.
What was it like that last 10%?
Excitement. Everybody wanted the kill shot.
Yes.
Trilin, Wizard, and Wudan got the kill shot. But everybody wanted. So even I was nuking. Once I saw him hit 0%, I just stopped resing and I was just nuking.
Right.
We were all hoping for that kill shot, but Trilin got it. And as soon as he got it, of course, before he was even killed, everybody was like, don't loot the corpse in case there's no loot. We don't want it to disappear. We want pictures. And sure enough, there was nothing on the corpse. So it had a 30-second timer. So that was the window that we had to enjoy our kill, was 30 seconds before that corpse disappeared. So everybody's taking the old
cloth cap on it.
Nope. There was no time to organize a group shot in front of the corpse or anything. It literally was gone in 30 seconds. So we got what screenshots we could, and it was a moment of celebration, and then all of a sudden it was just done. And I remember, might have been a day later, we got server-wide. Brenlow was the community manager at the time. And so he did a server-wide announcement that was role-play-ish, that had talked about the warring clans coming together to kill the undefeatable dragon.
I remember reading it.
Yes, I've actually got it. I'll pull it up and read it for you.
Yeah, let's do it.
I had to throw it in Discord last night into a chat channel because I found it on one computer and it wasn't on my laptop. So Brenlow. So in the darkness, the shout to engage was heard. Seconds later, a huge burst of magical energy could be felt as the wizards and shadow knights engaged, and huge volleys of arrows began to rain down as one against their target. The massive infantry then moved in to intercept Kiraferm in mortal combat, supported by a complement of warriors. The clashing of steel and the screams of chaos echoed in the beast's tomb. Over 3 hours had passed since the epic confrontation began, and then there was silence. As a cold, freezing wind blew across the fields of battle, hundreds had died, and more laid injured on the ground. All was silent again for a brief moment as the image of the legendary Kiraferm lay lifeless at their feet. Suddenly, the cries of joy and accomplishment began to echo through the decrepit and then rain across the land of Norath. Or decrepit hall and then rain across the land of Norath. The once warring clans of Ascending Dawn, Wudan, and Magus Imperialis Magicus had put the personal battles aside and come together united as one to accomplish the impossible. They had triumphed where all others before them had failed. They had slain the legendary Kiraferm. As the victors departed the ancient tomb, rumors began to spread across the world of Rallos Zek. Rumors became stories. Stories became legend. Yeah.
So, man, yeah. Almost brings a tear to my eye. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's
fucking cool.
Yeah, I got a kick out of it, and I saved that screenshot. Old Dupree that was in that tomb. Send this over to you.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just another buddy's screenshot that I happened to find posted on the internet years ago that I saved to my computer, so that I never lost it.
And you got all 3 guilds in the shot too. Perfect.
Yeah. He had posted a whole slew of screenshots that he had put up on the internet for everybody to save, and that one was among them. So I got a kick out of it.
That's great.
Yeah, but that was the legendary sleeper fight. Like I said, my claim to fame was discovering that he was back up, and frantically calling people on the phone, because that's how we did it back then.
You had to hit the phone tree.
Yes. So that was a good time.
So what was the day after that like? Could you even sleep that night?
Eventually. I honestly don't remember what the day after was like, because it was just kind of one of those. The memory of that was so notable that what happened after that is largely, I just don't remember it.
Yeah, it's just like in the shadow of that moment.
Yeah, like everything else around that is a blur for a while.
Wow.
I know that we still raided regularly, but that was almost, the beginning of the end for a lot of the players on Rallos. Like, how do you top that?
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there's nothing left to conquer.
Yeah, I mean, we still raided for another year. I think it was a year and a half, not a year and a half, about a year and 3 months before the Zeks merged. So we had a good, year of time left on the server before things really started to take a downhill vibe. But I don't remember the immediate aftermath of that. I just remember that things remained cordial between the guilds. There were no major wars after that. So
that's good.
The Rebirth conflict was the last major war on Rallos.
Okay. So Gates of Discord comes out. Are you still playing?
Yes, but I don't think we were actively doing anything in Gates of Discord yet because it was so hard, and everybody on Rallos, as I mentioned, was pretty far behind on gear because we spent more time fighting each other than raiding. So there wasn't a lot for us on. When did Discord launch? Do you remember the date?
Shoot, let me pull it up. I don't remember it offhand. But one thing I wanted to mention is like, that began the beginning of the change, right? Like now, final zones were going to be instanced, which meant there couldn't be PvP.
So really, PvP started to die with Luckland
because of the travel and stuff.
Well, no, it was the Nexus. It was a blue zone. We couldn't fight each other in the Nexus, and so that was kind of the beginning of the end for true PvP.
Wow.
Because
you had a safe spot.
Safe spots, and especially with wizards, they would get mana burn as an AA, so they would go and they would mana burn somebody to kill them instantly, and then they would just gate to the Nexus and they would wait for their next mana burn to come up an hour later.
That's so dumb.
Yeah. And I mean, so it was just one of those things. The Nexus and Shadowhaven and the Bazaar provided safe spots for people. Yeah. So it started to kill kind of the mentality of PvP because it wasn't fair necessarily. You couldn't chase across zone lines. That was one of the neat things about Rallos is you could be chasing somebody across multiple zone lines. You get to a particular zone line, next thing you know, you've just run into a pack of 5 of their buddies. So I mean, it was always one of those things where once they introduced blue zones to it, it killed a lot of it for us because there was no way to get to those guys, and especially the wizards. That was the one that got us the most with mana burn because that happened a lot.
Yeah, I think the Nexus change, or not the change, but that being blue was stupid. But I wonder what you could even do about the Bazaar. You know what I mean?
The Bazaar, I mean, there was no way they could make that not blue because you kill somebody, you get their cash on Rallos. Eventually, they took away the one item loot and just left it to coin only.
Yeah, which further weakens that rule set and everything.
It does. But yeah, that was one of the main changes that started to really impact PvP.
I assume like the rise of like Luckland also, all the top end gear was no trade.
Yeah,
the first time, like it was all no trade. So what are you even going to loot, right?
Yeah, then it was, I mean, back then it was trying to catch, if you were a PK trying to get a loot, you would look around for players that were holding an ice cream cone. That cone with, what's the item off of Nagafin's Lair, Magus Rokel. Yeah, so it looks like an ice cream cone almost.
Yeah.
So, but that was the same graphic as a Mana Stone.
Oh.
And there were a lot of those on Rallos. I still have one on a character. So that was a high dollar item. Like if you could kill somebody that was hanging on to one of those, because even though it was in the weapon slot and they got to the point where you couldn't, every once in a while people would
they just have it in their somewhere in their inventory, right?
Yeah, if it was in an open inventory slot because you couldn't click from bags. They would sometimes drop it into an open inventory slot and you'd get it that way. So yeah, because you'd immediately engage, they would switch their weapons for PvP weapons, and every once in a while that would, it was not something I did. I didn't hunt people for money, but that would be one of the ways that people would target them. They'd look for those rare items that were still something they could get. So
you got to be like a wizard and have an audio trigger for the click message on the Mana Stone, and as soon as you see it, just mana burn the person.
That wouldn't work though, because it'd be if you could see it though. That's a good point. I never thought about that from that perspective. If it wasn't equipped, so you couldn't see the cone, but you saw them using it, you knew it was in their inventory slot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would mana burn if I were a wizard in that point and try to steal it.
It looks like Gates launched February of 2004.
Okay, so that was a year before the merge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember it being so hard that nobody on Rallos really did it. Going back to the best of the best tournaments, that was a lot of people blamed gear on why Rallos didn't do better than we did. Which, I mean, I think the server fared very well in the overall best of the best tournaments with the multi-servers, but we were always undergeared in those. It was apparent that was a constant running theme during the time of those tournaments. That how are the Rallos guys doing so well? They don't have shit for gear.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is we were used to fighting people every single day, so we knew the tricks of the trade. And it was gear that carried the other servers.
Yeah. It sucks that you guys couldn't, like, they didn't just give you a PvP set of gear that everyone had static. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That would have been truly a test of who was better, who was more skilled. Because I remember watching those, and I think the biggest, at least in my mind, the biggest outrage was the Rogue tournament. Reefman ended up placing second, and that guy was a PvP god.
Yeah.
He still died on Rallos, like we all did. Nobody was immune to getting killed, but he was a PvP god, and he would have. I'm convinced he would have won that fight if the GMs hadn't snared, because that impeded his ability to move. They were so tired of the fight going on as long as it was that they snared both participants.
Wow.
And that inhibited his movement. And so then it became practically stand in front of each other, just hack and slash.
And then it's just gear. It is 100%
yeah, then
gear.
It was who can do more damage because of their gear, which was really unfortunate and unfair to him, because he was for all intents and purposes winning that fight with lesser gear because he moved a lot better than the other rogue. He knew how to
joust.
Yes. So that was definitely unfortunate, but yeah. So we didn't do a whole lot with Gates of Discord.
When did you get back into rating current content?
That would have been once MiM had transferred over to Povar. At that point, we had become Echo of Destruction.
Okay.
We had just lost. Perplexer was the leader of MiM. He had moved on to other things. He was actually director of esports for Blizzard for a while.
Wow. So he was up there with not in the same place, but similar to Tiggle and Fur.
Yes. He a lot of MiM was European.
Oh, really?
And so in Ultima Online, they were largely a European guild, very few Americans. And then when they came to Rallos, that started to shift. And towards the end, it was more Americans than it was Europeans. Sorry, my daughter's up, so the teenagers got her. So that's little squawks there in the background.
Oh, it's totally okay. So, you guys went to Povar. You're competing with Triton then, but it's all PvE style. Did you ever beat them? Were you guys racing for server first, or was that not a thing?
As much as we wanted to, unfortunately, we were light years behind in the gear game, so we had some catching up to do at that point. We also weren't super well organized when we transferred to Povar. Not everybody came with us, so we were lacking some numbers.
Yeah, that's rough.
The guild leader at the time, I don't want to speak ill of him, but he was not committed to it. Myself and another officer ended up approaching him and basically telling him, you need to step down. So I took over for a short period of time until we found a permanent leader to replace. Because this was kind of nearing the point where I was going to start my first college degree, and I knew I wasn't going to be playing long term, so I wasn't going to keep the leadership tag. So myself and my buddy Blizzardius were the two officers who kind of took the reins short term, and then we promoted one of our monks, Silverine, to leader. And he did a good job with it. I continued to raid with him for 6 to 9 months or so, maybe a year before I started my degree.
And was that like Omens of War when you stepped away?
Yeah. I think it was just after I got my Epic 2.0. Maybe not quite then. Maybe I hadn't gotten it yet. But I had stepped out at that point and moved on to... no, I did get it now that I think about it, because I guess I did raid it. Expansions were coming out 6 months at a time there. So I remember going through DON now that I think about it.
Okay.
DON, and it was Start of Prophecy Row is when I actually stepped away from the game for the first big break.
It's a good time to take a break because that expansion sucks.
Yeah, I remember playing it for the first couple days, and I was like, yeah, I'm not even going to try to play this while I'm going to school. This is terrible. Yeah. I did not enjoy it at all. I remember being in the Devastation trying to farm a comb or something like that. And I was like, nope, this is not what we're going to do. So
when you came back, when you came back after your degree and everything, did you come back to Povar or did you go somewhere else? Okay.
I came back to Povar, and Echoes of Destruction had merged with another guild and become Forces of Destruction. But the overall, like, the group had dwindled over time. We didn't have the ability to raid any of the current content, and I had spent so much time doing that in the latter part of my years on Rallos and moving into Povar that a lot of the original members were gone too, so it didn't feel like I had a big tie to the server or to that guild. So it wasn't the original MiM name. I had no true tie to it. So I remember going and joining Triton and got in with them. I probably raided with them for about a year. I think we were competing with Firestormers at the time. Yep. So they were the big competition for us. We went back and forth a little bit, but truthfully, I was never that into it. Like, it didn't have the same feel of what I was used to.
Yeah.
And so that's why when Fulak came out, I was like, I think I'm going to go try a progression server. This really isn't for me at this point.
Okay. How'd you like Vulak? Vulak, you stayed through Velius at least, right?
I stayed through into God.
Okay, pretty good amount of time for a TLP server.
Yeah. So I remember the battles with Faceless.
Oh yeah.
Especially listening to Liren's episode. Man, you had everybody fooled. I thought you were just the shit when it came to being a guild leader. Like you.
Oh, thanks.
No, you did a good job selling it. Honestly, I always had respect for you, even though I don't think we necessarily got along.
Yeah, you were part of the small group of people, you and like Demon Dread, that I was like friendly with. You know what I mean? In EOE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were definitely friendly. I don't think that we never hung out, of course. Cause,
right.
Because we were, but
you could never do that.
No, but I never had any disdain for you.
Yeah.
But no, I remember leveling Shadow Knights and then giving access to Damn Door so he could do his shenanigans.
Oh yeah.
I had two Shadow Knights leveled for that. It's funny because going back to that server, the shit that we did caused so many changes to the game. That,
Harp just got nerfed. Too little, too late, though.
Yeah. But I remember tracking on. We were both poop sock and tracking on, and I had let Damn Door log in both of my Shadow Knights, and Track was dead before I even saw his body materialize.
It was crazy.
Yeah, it was at that moment. It was. I knew that Damn Door was cheating at times, but I thought he was using something like IS Boxer.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty naive early on that server to know that he was straight up using MacroQuest. But I had also had no experience with that stuff, so I didn't know how it all worked exactly.
Right. It's easy to believe the convenient truth, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was MacroQuest use on that server was endemic. Every guild was using it.
Yeah.
EOE might have been the guild that was using it most effectively, and you were the guild where the guild leader was using it. But every guild was definitely using it. I'm sure there was a ton of people in Faceless who used it. I personally wasn't using it, and I don't think the officer team was, except for one person. But otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember on Vulak, the launch of Canark, I remember that launch, the fight for Trachanon was epic.
That was legendary, man. I can't even explain it.
Really was. It was one of those it took us hours battling back and forth to finally kill it. And I think we ended up pulling it underwater, didn't we?
Yeah, you guys used the dick torpedo.
Yes. That that was a good time, but I hated the launch of Canark when I look back at it. And really? I hated it for one very specific reason. You guys ruined it for me.
Uh-oh.
I was going to get the server first Cleric Epic, and I didn't. You guys beat me to it.
Did Beanie get it?
It was a female Cleric.
Probably
Beanie sounds right, yeah. I remember camping all my pearls, like going through the motions, and I was just hammering on Damn Door. I'm like, we've got to go get the king down. We have to go get the king. And they were dicking around with his epic because he was a monk, Segagen's epic. And I'm like, guys, we've got the server first monk at this point. We don't need 6 of them. let's go and get the king down. But I'll never forget it. We didn't have instancing then, so I remember zoning into Nagafin's lair, and I bolted straight for Ragefire, and I came around the corner to watch Beanie turning in her box.
Got him.
And that ruined my chance at the server first Cleric epic.
Yeah, and back then, one of the few things that people actually didn't do was kill triggered mobs, because you would still get suspended.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was just like, son of a... Like, I remember just being completely defeated, and that was one of the moments where I just... Like, I didn't leave EOE, but I was like, Damdor just doesn't understand how to lead people. He's leading a guild, and he's doing it well, but he doesn't understand the value of his people. They're a means to an end to him, and that was it.
Right, yeah. He was going for monk epics because he was monk, and his homies were monks.
Yep. Him and Segajin were real tight, and he had to keep Segajin happy, and that was a turning point for me, right? Like I stayed in EOE because at that point in time I knew the alternative was, I hate to say it, but probably going to the losing side.
Oh, guaranteed. You're right. If you left EOE, you weren't killing raid mobs very often.
And conversely, but at the same time, I was never really fully loyal to them at that point. Like, I had that just killed me, because I did everything that was on me to get it done. I hadn't slept, and just rounding that corner and seeing Beanie turn in, I was completely defeated at that point.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who felt the same way you did, and they would talk to me about it. And it was so hard to be me, because I'm like, listen, if all the people who said this to me came over to Faceless at the same time, it would be like flipping a switch. Like, we would be the top
really would have shifted the server entirely.
Right. But it's that confidence game that people, you have to play. And like, you have to prove that you can win. And in Classic, we did it. Remember, we won a lot of the poop socks in Classic, but in Kunark, that's when the macro quest guns really came out, and Damdor shut us out entirely. In Kunark, we only got 1 or 2 tracks.
Well, and it's funny because once you guys left, like, there really was no competition, so we just face rolled everything, and there was no reason to be the dicks that we were to Liren. I remember talking to Liren quite a bit, and I was always making suggestions to Damdor and Segaj. I'm like, just let him have something. Like, there's no reason to treat him this way. Because she and I talked a lot. I don't know how much she really remembers our conversations, but I just remember speaking with her quite a bit. And yeah, I always had a great respect for Liren. I think that she was doing the best that she could in an absolute shit situation to lead a guild.
Yeah, so, I mean, she had like the 2 most important qualities, right, for a guild leader. She was honest and she was earnest. Yeah. And she would just deal with everybody fairly, even EOE. So if you guys made a deal, you could always trust that Liren was going to hold up her end of the deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's unfortunately with a lot of that towards the end, especially, was Segajin and Hampshire. Yeah. Damdor started to fade out, I want to say, towards the end of Lucklin. Like, he was still around, but he was still the leader, but he was not making a lot of the calls. Yeah. And so he was the face of the guild. Right. But Segajin and Hampshire especially were pulling most of the strings at that stage of the game.
What is Hampshire's background? I used to know it. He has like some big guild chops in his background, right?
I don't know his background as a player. I just remember like everybody, like somebody telling me, that he lived, I don't know if he still lived with his parents. He was on disability, so that's how he was able to literally play all the time. But I don't know the personal details in terms of what led to that or how he was getting there. But yeah, he played a lot is all I know. And he was, I'll never forget it, because just talking to him, and I always got the sense that he was almost like a hippie, talking to him in Discord and TeamSpeak and all them. I guess, I don't know if Discord was out then, but TeamSpeak. And he just never struck me as a guy who gave 2 shits about life itself. Like, the game was always his focus.
Right, yeah. Now, I might be misremembering. I might be getting my Ogre Warrior mains confused here, but there is someone, I think it's Hampshire, who has like a huge in-game gambling problem. Not commenting on the real dude at all, but he loses all his chrono all the time to the casinos.
I feel like that is Hampshire, but I don't know, because honestly, it was, there were some people that I really liked in EOE. Vikart was one of them.
Vikart's a good dude.
Yeah, he was really good. I had some. I'm drawing a blank now on names. That's always been my weakness, is remembering people's names. But there was a bard that I hung out a lot with. Can't remember his name now, but yeah, it was just one of those that I don't know. I tried to stay away from Hampshire as much as I could.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of EOE I was not in good with. I kept a group of players that I would do stuff with on the side just to get stuff done.
Yeah.
But I did not spend a lot of time with the leadership.
Now, you after that would go on to make MiM on Lockjaw, right?
Yes.
What motivated you to remake the guild after all those years?
That was just pure happenstance. So I ended up going to log into Lockjaw, or I was talking about it, and one of the old leaders of MiM, Shim, had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to play too." And a group of us had just talked, and we're like, "Well, we should form a guild there. Let's." We actually started on Ragefire first.
Mm-hmm.
And we got onto Ragefire, and then we started running into some other people from Rallos Zek. Tig, who was in Ascending Dawn, was there, and so he came to hang out with us, and we just ended up deciding, what, let's just make MiM. We're not going to do anything super crazy with it, but let's just put it together and see what happens. And as soon as we created the guild, like, people started coming out of the woodwork that were from Rallos.
Heck yeah.
Like, they saw the tag and they were immediately like, I was on Rallos, can I join? We're like, yeah, sure. And it grew pretty quickly that then our discussion started being, should we start raiding? Should we make this a thing? This all happened within a few days on Ragefire, and they announced Lockjaw because of the overpopulation of the server. But we ended up going with yeah, let's do it, but let's move over to Lockjaw. Let's get this more formalized. Let's get ourselves organized, and let's go there, because we wanted to actually get it with a little bit of a running start rather than the ragtag effort that we put into it at the very beginning, because we were just planning to screw around.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, TL was not going to share with anybody anyway, so
yeah, and I definitely heard the rumors coming from the upper ranks. Like, I'd seen them race on to get the server first, and so there was definite concern there as well that we weren't going to be able to compete because we were not near as well organized. We all had careers at this point. We weren't going to be near as focused. I think Vulak was the most hardcore I ever was with the bat phones and the poop socking. And I still don't know how I found all the time for that. I just remember setting up my bat phone and waking up in the middle of the night. Like, I would have my computer speakers set for the trigger word as loud as they could
rate
be.
time now or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, because I had to laugh going back to your episode with Larry, and you guys talked about how you had to keep that all secret.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yes.
people would exploit that. And I remember one night somebody had found out ours, and I'd gotten woken up, and I was so pissed about it. I was like, "Come on, like, who the fuck does this?"
That was
But
Vesper.
yeah,
Vesper was our spy. She leaked it.
Yeah, and I had audio trigger Captain Picard saying "Red alert! All crew to battle stations" was mine.
Nice.
And so it had the alarm from the Enterprise going off and everything. So it was loud and obnoxious. And I'm surprised. I lived in an apartment at the time. I'm surprised that with as many times as that would go off on random nights that I didn't have my neighbors complaining. But yeah, I had that turned up to full blast on my computer speakers so that as soon as that went off, I'd fly out of bed. So, but yeah, so we started on Lockjaw, and it really just became a take anybody that was from Rallos and anybody who wanted to come join us and restart the guild. But I learned the lessons from Vulak. I didn't want to be a guild that was going to try to do what EOE did. I never really liked our style there, and I think I just continued on with it out of necessity. If I wanted to play, that was my server. That's where I did it.
Yeah.
But I had enough of their shenanigans towards GOD, because they were pushing everybody off the server. We had no recruitment base.
Yeah.
The server was a ghost town at that point. I was just like, you know what, this isn't for me anymore.
Yeah. EOE killed the server, 100%.
They did. So I remember quitting for a little while until Lockjaw was announced, and so we got Ragefire and Lockjaw. We got started there, and that's kind of how you and I got back together with our discussions on raid rotations.
Yeah. I think I tried my best to not be EOE 2.0.
I think you tried your best. I won't say that you did it poorly. I think it was all just. I think you did it well, actually, and you were almost the master manipulator during those negotiations, because I could always see what you were doing.
Yeah.
But MiM was never in a position, like, we were not going to be a bat phone guild, so we had we weren't going to compete for the free for alls, and we knew that. I think my biggest frustration was, almost feeling like I was in the middle of the pissing match between you and Dima. And so as you guys would move your chess pieces, we would take what we could get there. But you guys were always at least fair with that. If it was our turn, it was our turn, and you guys left it alone. So
yeah, I always felt like you guys were basically an ally of ours. I thought of you in that way, at least.
Yeah. Well, I remember we did the first Negafen together, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I was always very appreciative that you brought us into that, because I was on that raid myself. We didn't have a big presence there, 7 or 6 to 10 people. I mean, we didn't have 2 full groups. It was maybe 1.5 that we brought to the mix.
You guys had like some gnome mages, right, in your group?
Yeah.
I remember the yellow robe gnome mages there.
Yep. Gnomes were actually a big deal on Rallos. Everybody hated gnomes. It was like a running joke. Gnomes were, especially gnome wizards, they were the PKs largely on the server.
Yeah.
So everybody always had something against gnomes. In fact, there was a gnome warrior in Swarm of Fear. And did you ever hear about the BFG quest in Everquest?
Yeah. Frigid Nasher?
Yes. So he got that, and that worked on other players. And on Rallos, you could cast it on players. And I'll never forget, we were up and playing a Sky, and he was fucking around with it. And I remember I was an officer in in Shadow of the Swarm at this point. And I told him, I'm like, Tizzo, fucking knock it off, dude. Like, we got to get this done. You're going to kick somebody off of an island or something. And whatever I said, I said it in a way that pissed him off. So he turned around and he used it on me. And sure enough, he shot me across the zone. I flew off the island, and I died embedded in the side of a Freedy's hut on his island. I was so pissed, because then it was a whole effort to get me back up there, and this was
waste everybody's time.
This was when Keys still disappeared, so I had to go find a wizard who wasn't raiding with us to port me back up there, and we had to. I think you could buy the key to that island, so I'd just buy the key and zone back up to a Freedy and get my corpse that way. But it was just one of those, like, it took time out of the raid, and I was so pissed. But yeah, he had that, and he was a gnome gnome warrior.
Yeah.
So he was running around with that, and I loved the guy, but that particular day, I was just so irritated. Like, Tizzo, put that thing away. That is not a toy to be playing with up here. And they ended up taking it out of the game. It's not a quest you can finish anymore.
Yeah.
But
I remember being afraid of gnomes on Rallos Zek, because like every funky rogue I ran into was a gnome.
Yeah.
I just saw him and I didn't trust him immediately. I'm like, this guy's going to kill me.
Everybody had gnomes always got looked at twice on Rallos. They were never a race that you would just let walk into the room and be okay with it.
Yeah. That's so
there
funny.
Were a lot of things like that. I mean, just we could literally go on for hours of all the stories I have of Rallos. I met so many great people. I met some developers for Dark Ages of Camelot.
Oh, that game was great.
Yeah, they were in a guild called Imperial Forum. Their leader, Copper, was actually one of their high-end developers. I don't think I ever learned his real life name, or if I have, I forgot it. But then there was a ranger, Kitteria. Admittedly, in my early days of EverQuest, I had a little bit of a crush on her. Yeah. Now, she and I grouped a lot. We would get together in like Lesser Fadark and kill the Nightbright sisters.
Nice.
I think we camped my J boots together. We did a lot of things like that, just hanging out. But she was like a producer for the game or something like that. I'd have to go back and look at her credentials, but yeah, her name was Yvette Nash. So she spent a lot of time in the gaming industry. Last time I Googled her name just to see what she was up to. She had some notable game experience on there in terms of games she had worked on. So
that's awesome.
I had Raitan, got to meet Lindro, the GM, at one of the meetups. MiM was always really big about meetups.
You guys even did that on the TLP servers, right?
Mm-hmm. We still do it. My bachelor party ended up being a big meetup. There were like 20 to 25 of us in Las Vegas for that. We during my time on Rallos, so like I said, I started playing when I was 18 in high school, and I think my first trip was a Swarm of Fear trip down to Texas, Austin, Texas, when I was 20. So I wasn't old enough to drink at the time. That was a good time. We were literally, there was about 30 of us crammed in a 2-bedroom apartment for that trip.
Ooh.
And I remember my spot to sleep was underneath the kitchen table. And I distinctly remember there was enough room under there that I was comfortable. There was plenty of room under there, but we did that. And then the next meetup I had was a big MiM one out in LA. It was hosted by Zaide. She was kind of the, we'll call her the belle of Rallos. Very beautiful woman. She, everybody had a crush on Zaide, but she was not one to mingle with that on the server. She was there to play a game. She was not there to start relationships. But
that's good and rare.
Yeah, everybody knew how pretty she was. Very sweet woman. Her real name's Melissa, and we had a great time. Her parents had gone on vacation, so we had her apartment and her parents' house that were about a mile apart from each other. So we had a really big party that Saturday night. I had flown into LAX. One of the lead GMs had picked me up. I'm forgetting his name, but Lindro was with him.
Mm-hmm.
We hung out. We went to Six Flags out there. Had a big party that Saturday night, and that's when I met Raitan and discovered that, oh my God, my old guild leader is actually a developer. And he brought a couple other devs that I don't remember there, but we had a great time. That was the first time that Tig and I had met in real life. He was the guy from Ascending Dawn. And there's a picture of all of us. We took a group photo of all of us flipping off the camera for the Peacebreakers.
Nice.
Because they were not well liked at that point. I think that was probably right in the middle of the Rebirth War. Because that war went on for at least 4 to 6 months. But after that, we did another small gathering in Colorado that I remember, and that was when I was in MiM. There were about 8 of us that got together there. And just throughout the years, we've made it a point to get together and actually meet each other. Especially awesome. When I took over on the TLPs, that was something that organization was better at that point. So I really wanted to continue that. Since the start of our time on Lockjaw, we've probably had 5 or 6 different trips where we've gotten together, large groups of us. Most of them almost always occur in Vegas.
I kind of wish I had done something like that over the years.
It's, honestly, that I think that's the thing that I take the most away from Everquest. A lot of people have been in it for, listening to Quarkin stories. Like, he was always well known throughout the entire community, listening about his road trip and whatnot. But for me, it was always about the people. My friends, similar to Quarkin, they'd always be like, you need to come hang out with us. I'd be like, no, I got to play Everquest, because that truly became my close-knit group of friends. I still have a handful of friends from my high school days and whatnot that I still talk to and get together with. But like one of the officers from MiM, Lockjaw and Beyond, 5-0, his name cleverly, because he was a police officer. So he was in my wedding. He was one of my groomsmen.
Wow.
And believe it or not, I actually had more MiM show up to my wedding. I did a destination wedding, and so they were all for it. So I had more MiM show up than I did actual family members of mine.
Wow.
It was funny, but yeah, we did it on the cruise ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And I mean, credit to my family. I had to do a legal wedding on land, and a lot of them came to that because they're like, I don't want to go spend $5,000 to watch you get married, and I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
Especially with I'm one of the older cousins, so a lot of my aunts and uncles still had kids that they would have to pay to bring along, but yeah, that's always been what it's been for me. It's always about the people and the relationships that we formed. So even when we weren't playing EverQuest together, we'd have chat groups going and text messages and things of that nature. It really was a good time. And one of our more recent meetups, I always have a phrase when I log into the game. I get in Discord and greetings and salutations, everybody. How you doing? So that became my tagline: greetings and salutations. And so one of the MiM members had the idea to create a challenge coin to pass along at the meet and greets. So anybody who attends one gets one. And so he made a couple hundred of them or so, but on one side it has the MiM logo, and then on the other side it has the phrase greetings and salutations. And so that was kind of a shout out they did to me, which I have to say I was very humbled by it. Thought that was really cool that we did that. So
that's cool. I've never seen anyone outside of like the military use challenge coins before, so it's cool to hear that you guys did.
Yeah, I'll have to send you a picture of that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I have I'll have to find them. Admittedly, they're packed in a box right now.
Right. Yeah, you're moving soon or whatever. Right. Or did you already move?
No, it's coming up in a couple weeks. So we bought a house. We've been remodeling it, and last of the countertops, and it went in yesterday. Backsplash is being finished up Monday, and then we're done. So
nice.
So we can officially move in. So we're going to start small moves. We got to the end of the month, so we're going to start moving stuff slowly.
Where does MiM go from here now? Like, what's the next in the future for you?
That's a good question. We talked about starting another chapter on Oakwind, and it just isn't the right time for me, and nobody else felt like they wanted to take up the leadership reins.
Well, they're all smart. That's why.
Right. No, I with my daughter being born in November, I wasn't confident that I could take up the reins at this point, and I'm also at a stage in my career where I'm why you get in the point where you've been working really hard and you're still working really hard, and you're on that edge of getting to a point where maybe you can hit that promotion that's a little more relaxed, but still where you want to be.
Yep.
So I'm kind of at that stage where I need to keep grinding, and I didn't
buckle
want
down
to
hard until you get to the promised land.
Yes, and I'm doing a lot of travel for work, and so it was just one of those. I was like, I don't think this is the right time for me, and we're also leery about how the first to engage was going to work.
Yeah,
when they first rolled it out on test, the horror stories were like, yeah, this is definitely not going to happen. So we agreed we would just play casually in another guild on Oakwind.
Which guild are you in?
Things out. Pixel Therapy.
Okay, and not the worst guild to join, so that's good.
No, they're all right people. I have no issues with them. The leader was actually former MiM.
There you go. Perfect.
So yeah, it was just a natural fit, and like I said, good people. I've enjoyed playing casually. It's been kind of a nice break. I'd be a liar to say I don't have that itch to lead, but I know I don't have the time.
Yeah,
we've talked about trying to put something together next year for the 25th anniversary. But
I think you should. I think it sounds like, just what I'm hearing through the grapevine, everybody, and I mean everybody, is going to come back for the 25th anniversary. So it's going to be a madhouse.
Yeah, which concerns me because their servers do not have the best history of supporting a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they'll probably have to look at doing 2 servers at a minimum.
Well, I'm sure they'll just fumble the ball and come up with a really dumbass rule set, and all the goodwill will fade away. And
I have a feeling they're going to take the best of every TLP and throw it all into one.
They should. It should be 6 weeks or so expansions, kind of like a little bit slower than Cello, but faster than normal, with mischief loot, and ship it.
Yeah, maybe even the first to engage. Who knows? Yeah. I mean, it's worked out well. I think that's reduced a lot of the griefing in the regular zones.
Yeah.
It'll certainly be interesting for the free-for-all open world content for raiding, but yeah, you're just going to get bards in there being the first to tag stuff. But
yeah, I think after all these years, I'm pretty much over the open world thing. I'm just like, hey, I'll see you in Gates of Discord. Okay, when content stops becoming just purely auto attack, then we'll see who's the top guild.
Exactly. Or at least, maybe Planes of Power where you have to have a coordinated effort to get it finished. Like I've always thought whoever truly wins the Planes of Power race is your, um, maybe not your top tier guild, but that's the first one where it's a fair race at least. Because
Yeah.
outside of Plane of Storms, which anymore is a joke with the number of medallions that drop,
Yeah.
there's nothing to cock block anymore. So
Yeah. I
so
think
that would be a fun one.
that's a
But
good
yeah, we're
take on it.
we're talking about next year, so we'll see if that comes to fruition. We want to do it. If I can't lead, I'll have to find somebody who's willing to. But that's a great thing about MIM, as I've always said. It's not about me. It's not one leader. Anybody who truly wants to take up the reins, the group will follow. So hopefully
Yeah.
that's the case. But we'll see. I mean, you never know. So
Right.
that's kind of the goal.
Awesome.
How about
Well,
you? What's next for Faceless? You're rating on not Thornblade, Mischief right now, right? Still active
yeah.
there?
Faceless has been the top guild on Mischief. It was I don't know if you know the history, and I probably shouldn't go too deep in it here, but it was a bumpy road. Me and Krim started a combined guild called Faceless X in Virtue, so Faceless plus IV.
Oh,
Um,
Crims.
and we did Classic and Cunark together. Obviously, won those, no competition at all. But I didn't like the Plat Raid game. I didn't like how the guild felt, so I split off and made the Faceless, which we had reserved all the way back from Vulak.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Liren Melusine had saved it for me. So we pulled that back out, started our own guild. The In Virtue guys, aka Greed is Good, is what they became. And it was really like a lot of Twisted Legion, Amtrak, AOS guys, plus Crim. They won Velius, Luckland, and Pop. Our Pop launch, instead of rushing Plane of Time, we did a really stupid thing, which was we split the entire Pop launch. And wow, I never want to do that again. It was very painful.
That would be very hard to track from a flag perspective, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, and then God and Beyond, Faceless has won every single expansion.
Okay, awesome.
And right now we're heading into Seeds of Discord, Seeds of Destruction.
Seeds of Destruction,
yeah,
that's a great expansion.
Yeah,
that's one of those that I've wanted to replay, but never made it to it on a TLP.
The two big things I want to do on the server, I want to get the Grand Slam achievement in Underfoot. Only one guild has ever done it, and like even on live, it was never done. And I want to kill Miritus in Era. Those are my two big goals. Other than that, it seems like Faceless is just gonna, we're at that point where it's gonna go. It's gonna be fine. And the server has like 20 guilds on it.
I've heard the population is extremely healthy for the longevity of the server so far.
It's nuts. I set up this guild leader Discord where all the leaders and officers of all the guilds are in there, and we talk and coordinate. We gave out a ton of flags for Crystallos and stuff, for SOF's flagging. So everything is really good, very much kumbaya, you know what I mean?
Nice. So you achieved what you had hoped for Lockjaw.
Yeah, many years later, with the help of Agents of Change and stuff.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Hats off to you trying to work it out with Crims early on, because that had to be difficult. I know you'll save that story for another day, but he was one of those I always butted heads in my experiences with him. He was difficult to deal with, so that was quite the undertaking to try to make that happen.
I'll say Crim is a good guy, but he's got a big ego, and I have a big ego, and it's just too much ego in one space. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, he's definitely. I don't think he's a bad guy by any stretch. I just know he can be really hard to work with. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but hey, Dupree, it has been really wonderful having you on the podcast. Hopefully, we get to play again together in the future. Is there anyone you want to shout out or anything before we wrap up?
I mean, the truth be told, I just have to say it's an honor to be here, especially following up the conversation with Corkin.
Yeah.
Of all the people on Rallos, in the grand scheme of things, I'm surprised that I'm here talking about Rallos with you, because I know it's just because we know each other, but especially the early history, I'm definitely not the best person for. But it was really fun. I have to thank you, because just taking the trip down memory lane the last few days while I've been thinking about this has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
and shout out to all my friends that I played with over the years. That's what it's all been about, and I look forward to future memories with them, and And with you as well. I hope that we do end up aligning on maybe the 25th anniversary server, and we get to have that exposure to each other again on a regular basis.
Yeah, that'd be cool. If I announce a guild, I'm sure all the evil forces of Norath will align to form a super guild to fight me. So I don't know if I can commit, but maybe I'll play.
Hopefully it does. I mean, you did it once. You're welcome always. Hopefully it doesn't turn into the server launch with, I forget which server. Was it Cello, where everybody got the cameos?
Yeah, that was Cello.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't turn into that. But at the same time, that was entertaining. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll get Ice Cube back in here.
There we go. Yeah. There we go.
All right, bro. It was awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Talk to you later.
Yep, DramaQuest out.